All right, it's 3 o'clock. We're going to get going here. Thank you for joining this afternoon. This is the Truckee Fire Protection District Community Wildfire Prevention Grant Workshop for fiscal year 25-26. Just a disclosure, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted after this meeting. Some meeting etiquette here. Let's please stay muted during my discussion here. I'll talk for about 45 minutes and we'll give about 15 minutes for a question and answer at the end of the meeting. Please keep your camera off to save some bandwidth. It is snowing and I'm just waiting for our internet to go out here mid-meeting. So let's try to keep the bandwidth going so everybody can hear and see me. And again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand during the question and answer session at the end of this presentation. This workshop is the first of a series of 4 workshops. Those dates have been posted on our website. And today we're going to talk about grant overview and application process and review. This is the one required workshop for you to attend in order to be able to apply. The other workshops are not required, but highly encouraged. So today we're going to talk about kind of a summary of the program, qualifying project types and activities, eligible applicants, some conditions and important points. We'll talk about the application review process, CEQA requirements, and what happens if you get awarded. So to start here, I'm going to give an overview of the Wildfire Prevention Grant Program. This is a program designed and intended to enhance existing forest management and fuel reduction projects and activities, or support new projects and programs with the main objective of reducing the threat and intensity of wildfire in Truckee and Donner Summit areas. I am here as the forester of the fire district. I'm a registered professional forester in the state of California, and I administer this grant program. I'm here to help you think pragmatically about your ideas, not my ideas, but your ideas that may fit this grant program. And I want to give you direction throughout this process on how to complete the application process in a competitive way. I'm not here to design your project for you, but I'm here to support you through the process. We really do love this grant program. It is kind of a one-of-a-kind grant program where we have a local fire district awarding large amounts of money, public funding back to our community. It does spur a lot of interest and enthusiasm, which we love. We'll discuss in depth today the program, and I encourage you as we work through this to really critically assess whether your project aligns with the goals of this program and the procedural guide before starting the application process. The intent of this program, is really to share funding, share capacity, and get more done in our community and move that needle of wildfire resilience in a good direction. There's lots of project ideas that come up every year when we release this program. And there are some ideas that come out that sometimes we find are better supported through existing Measure T programs. So if you think this is the case, or if you have ideas on how we can better support your community outside of this specific grant program, please come talk to our dedicated wildfire prevention team, including myself, Eric Kornvet, Maria Marsh, and Brittany Shelton-Dooley. Just a disclosure here at the top of this presentation is, this grant program does require a significant amount of effort to get through the process. And the application process, I would call it the easy part of all of this, right? The hard part is when you get awarded a grant and now you're responsible for implementing. Sorry about that. Really, the easy part is the application. It is kind of your test. Can you get through the application process? Can you do it successfully? And again, the hard work really starts when you get awarded the grant and you actually got to implement it. So quick grant program summary for you all. The grant program provides funding for projects within the Truckee Fire Protection District only. Any projects outside of the Fire Protection District boundaries are not eligible. We're really looking for projects, again, that increase the protection of people, structures, communities, and the environment from wildfire. We have up to $550,000 available in our budget for fiscal year 25-26. This grant budget is subject to change at our discretion. This will be a big recurring theme, and we'll talk about this a lot in all of the grant workshops, is projects that have documented environmental compliance are ready to begin implementation immediately and have strong community support as well as matching funds will receive additional priority in the scoring process. And projects are selected on a competitive basis. This program's proven to be very competitive. Almost every year we are getting double the requested, funding that we have. So last year, we had over $1 million requested. We only had about $500,000 to give out. So we are seeing this be a very competitive program. Consecutive awards or even a successful solicitation is not guaranteed. And this is a tough one. I think we need to be prepared for this as people, if we're writing applications, it can be tough because writing the actual application is not a reimbursable expense. This is your own time spent writing this application, and you're not guaranteed funding. I would say, though, that any of the work that is taking place during this process is not a waste of time. It's a way to get your community engaged, involved, and a way for you to understand, if you're not a typical professional organization that writes grants all the time, what is the steps that need to be taken to be successful and set your community up for success. Any applications missing requirements listed in the procedural guide and the grant guidelines, if they're missing any of the stated requirements, we will not consider them for funding. So please read the grant guidelines carefully and thoroughly. Here's a map of our fire district. It goes from Highway 20 interchange pretty much to Floreston. It includes portions of the town of Truckee, unincorporated Nevada County, and unincorporated Placer County. If you have questions about whether your project is within our fire district, please reach out to me. There are 3 project types available for funding. So we have 3 categories: forest fuels reduction, community wildfire preparedness, and wildfire prevention education. And we'll talk about all of these individually, but an important point is for any forest fuels reduction projects must be at least 5 acres in size, and you must have a registered professional forester committed to the project. So for forest fuels reduction projects, we have a bucket of examples of projects. This is not an exhaustive list. So things like creating strategic shaded fuel breaks, selective tree removal, clearing vegetation adjacent to private roadways, reduction of fuels around critical infrastructure, equipment purchases, removal of dead trees, biomass utilization, prescribed fire, and technical assistance from a registered professional forester are all eligible projects under the forest fuels reduction category. I have an example project here from last year that we awarded. It's called the Tundra TDPUD Partnership Project. And I wanted to quickly highlight some things here that made this a strong proposal. So a couple things. This was 3 different landowners who coordinated and collaborated together and submitted a joint application to us for a 109-acre project. There's a couple things that makes this project competitive. You'll see the shaded gray areas to the north of the hashed areas on the map. Those gray areas are areas that we have already treated with other funding sources. And so this project is an extension of that previously completed work. Another important point is that these landowners went through a great deal of effort to involve the community, specifically the pine forest community and the commercial businesses off of Pioneer Trail, to inform them of this project and gain letters of support. This project also had a significant amount of matching funds to upwards of $50,000 from the landowners. I want to share a video if this will work, and I'm not sure it will, but I want to show a video of this project and give people an idea of the types of projects we are looking to fund under the forest fuels reduction project category. And this is a video. Let me see if I can do this. Hopefully this comes up clear on everybody's end, but these types of projects in this category of funding sources or funding types, these are large intensive forest management projects that require heavy equipment to make a difference in the woods. And so here we have a feller buncher. I can see it's not coming through super clean on your guys' screen, but this feller buncher is a mechanized piece of equipment that cuts trees and removes them and stacks them into piles. And this is the type of equipment that we need to get our community used to working in the woods. This is a production commercial logging operation, but it is for forest health and ecological restoration. And we see skidders now, we call them skidders, bringing logs to log decks. And people see this type of work in the woods and sometimes feel like irreparable damages are being done. And that's just not the case here. Our land is used to this type of disturbance. We need this type of disturbance to create resiliency in our forests and restore historic conditions. And without this type of equipment, this work would not be possible at the scale we need it to be done. So if you are looking to apply for this project and you are looking to work with the registered professional forester, which is required, and your registered professional forester is going to permit a commercial project, this is what you can expect to happen in the forest. Right? We have large equipment processing logs, cutting trees. We have log trucks and log decks, chippers coming in and chipping these big slash piles. And log trucks coming and picking the logs up and taking them to a mill. And then we finish with a mastication treatment. And this is a process, right? There are stages to this, and we need people to trust this process. The land recovers quite nicely in snow country where we live. And the final product, we're looking for a clean, as close to a park-like setting as we can reasonably get, but there are going to be short-term impacts with this type of work. Visual changes to the forest, as well as berming from equipment. But these are all actions that are planned, permitted, and are very thoughtfully carried out by both the forester and the licensed timber operator or the logger. So thanks for entertaining that video. We'll move on to another project category, which includes community wildfire preparedness. I should say quickly back on this other that last video, we understand that not every single project will be of this type. There are some projects that maybe it does just require some hand crews and some chippers, depending on the condition of the land and the type of, the topography and the location of the project and what the ultimate goal is. But please know, again, that a lot of these private landowners that want to apply to this grant project are going to be required to work with the registered professional forester, who is going to want to file some type of timber harvest plan exemption to achieve CEQA compliance. And this is the type of work that we can expect. So moving on to community wildfire preparedness, these are projects, new ideas to improve community level compliance with laws and regulations required by Public Resource Code 4291, which is the law in California for defensible space. We have to be thoughtful here because requests seeking funding for programs and services already provided by Truckee Fire are not eligible. So this requires some creativity. And if you have ideas, let's talk through them and make sure they're eligible for this grant project. I want to give an example of a project that the review committee chose not to award a few years ago, in which a local Firewise community was proposing a rebate program to homeowners for performing home hardening retrofits. Well, since Truckee Fire already offers a rebate program for this, it's not eligible for funding. However, if your Firewise community wanted to hire a general contractor and purchase bulk materials such as fence or things to enclose low to grade decks, those are not programs that we necessarily offer. We're not handing out bulk materials of home hardening stuff to retrofit homes with. We just offer a rebate program for the homeowners to do so. So other projects might include purchase and utilization of early fire detection technology and software, or evacuation planning projects that help residents prepare for a wildfire evacuation scenario. I have another example project that we awarded to Kingvale and Plavada. This was their community wildfire preparedness project. And this was a unique, creative idea to basically install emergency evacuation route signs, reflective street signs, and reflective address signs in a community that didn't have that before. And on top of that, any resident that requested a defensible space inspection was then eligible to have a fireproof tarp purchased through the grant. This was administered by the Kingvale Water Users Association. Our last category of project types is wildfire prevention education. This includes development and implementation of public education and outreach programs, workshops, meetings, material creation, and other educational activities to increase knowledge and awareness of wildfire prevention information. These projects are subject to Truckee Fire approval. And we haven't received the grant yet in our fourth year, in 3 years, proposing a wildfire prevention education project. So we would love to see one. Ineligible projects basically include purchase of capital equipment greater than $150,000, installation, upgrade, or maintenance of fire protection features such as roads, bridges, structures, or water storage facilities, fire hydrants, or other permanent infrastructure. The big one here is, individual or private landowners requesting a grant specifically for fuel reduction work within the defensible space zone on their own property is not eligible for funding. It is the landowner's legal responsibility in California to manage 100 feet from their structures, and we will not use public funding to do so. There are exceptions to this. Take, for example, a homeowners association that has open space or green belts in their community that are immediately adjacent to developed or habitable structures. In that case, if an HOA was requesting funding to treat these areas, we would entertain that, and we would fund a project that is improving community level defensible space by treating HOA green belts. Another big one is projects or activities on land planned for development, whether that's commercial, industrial, or multifamily in the next 5 years. And this is subject to our discretion. We won't pay for any road construction, grading, or reconstruction. Projects or activities utilizing Truckee Fire staff without prior approval from Truckee Fire are not eligible. But if you talk to us and work with us and we agree to help you or attend something that you are planning, then that is fine. And then the last one, requests seeking funding for programs and or services already provided by Truckee Fire are not eligible. Eligible applicants include private non-industrial landowners. Private non-industrial landowners can only apply for forest fuels reduction projects. Local agencies and special districts are eligible. Native American tribes, incorporated nonprofit organizations with or without a 501c3, unincorporated nonprofit entities, which includes Firewise communities, HOAs, POAs, road agreements, associations, stuff like that, mutual benefit corporations or similar. And then a change this year is privately held for-profit company or corporation, only if one-to-one match can be provided. So if you're a for-profit company or corporation and you want a grant from Truckee Fire, you need to be prepared to bring match to the project. So if you're asking for $100,000, we would fund $50,000 and you would be responsible for the other $50,000. Eligible costs are basically any costs that are necessary and prudent for the accomplishment of the project. We list them here. Technical assistance is eligible. Permitting costs are eligible. Supplies, contractor costs, whatever that may be, whatever your project is, are eligible. Staff salaries and benefits directly related to project management and implementation, and then indirect costs not exceeding 10%. Keep in mind, this is a community wildfire prevention fund, and this grant program is not intended to fund overhead positions or substantially fund staff salaries. If you are an organization or a private landowner, think about how you can make that be your matching contributions for staff salaries, and think about whether or not you do need indirect costs. We will not entertain an agreement or application to a private landowner asking for a 10% indirect. Indirect costs are more for professional organizations who have bills to pay to keep their lights on and have administrative staff assisting with the project. This is not a way for landowners to get 10% of $100,000 in their pocket for free. Ineligible costs. We kind of talked some ineligible activities. This is all in the procedural guide, and I'll just touch on the same thing I just talked about. Our costs associated with defensible space work within 100 feet of a structure on the same property where the grant work is occurring is not eligible. There are a lot of conditions and important points, and I should say that it is a requirement to read the procedural guide in its entirety. This presentation is basically verbatim from the procedural guide, but there is a lot of information in there that you need to be aware of. So applications are due on Friday, May 2nd at 5 o'clock. It is an online application submission this year. And any applications not received by the deadline or that do not fully adhere to procedures outlined in the procedural guide will not be accepted or considered. There are no exceptions here. There is no advantage or prioritization given for submitting your application early. All applications submitted by the deadline will receive the same level of consideration and review. You are not required, but you are strongly encouraged to consult with me, the district professional forester, and attend or watch all recordings of the virtual grant workshops before submitting a grant application. Again, we've talked about this before, but private non-industrial landowners are only eligible to apply for projects under the forest fuels reduction category. We have that minimum 5 acres. And don't let this be a barrier. Right? Smaller landowners are encouraged to collaborate with nearby property owners to create projects equal to or larger than 5 acres. Project areas do not have to be contiguous. For commercial projects, any revenue generated from the sale of forest products must be reinvested back into the project or returned to Truckee Fire. If you have questions about that, there's ways to work around that with your contractor in terms of getting a discount on the price based on the amount of money he's going to make off of the forest products or the logger's going to make from the forest products removal from your property. This is a big one. That's why we have it highlighted and bolded. Grantees must have the ability to plan, administer, and complete the grant project. These projects really are intended to be managed and implemented by the applicant or a professional third party, such as a registered professional forester, not Truckee Fire. Okay, we've learned some lessons over the years, which is why we require a registered professional forester to be committed to your project, because I do not have the capacity to manage your grant project. That is not the intent or spirit of this program. Again, we are trying to increase capacities to get more done. I have several projects that I'm working on every year, and I am not able to help you administer or complete your grant. So projects proposed on forested landscapes will require a registered professional forester. So all eligible applicants applying under forest fuels reduction project categories must have an RPF committed to the project prior to applying. We do have to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. This is not something that private landowners are going to be able to complete by themselves unless you are a CEQA expert in your professional capacity. This is why we want people to hire registered professional foresters, because there are many pathways to achieving CEQA compliance. And we don't expect private property owners to be experts in this by any means. You must have CEQA compliance within 6 months of a grant execution. No reimbursable work on awarded projects may commence until there's a fully executed agreement and there is CEQA compliance, but we'll talk about that. You can still do non-ground disturbing treatments without having CEQA compliance. So planning your project, laying it out, marking timber, but you cannot do any ground disturbing work until you have CEQA compliance. And you must recognize the Measure T program if you're awarded, and it includes an acknowledgement there at the bottom, and that's in the procedural guide. So the application process, you should work with us and myself for guidance in developing your project plans for your application. Again, I'm here to not tell you what you should do, but take your ideas and give you some strategies to be competitive and fit the program. Everything must be submitted online this year. That is a change, and we'll talk about that. We have an application workbook that can be downloaded and worked on offline, so that you don't lose any of your work. And then you would copy and paste your answers to the prompts from your workbook over to the final online application when you submit. I want to take this time to provide a quick tour of our website. Because there's a lot of information in the website. So truckeefire.org/grants is the landing page for the grant program. It lists the several things: eligibility, gives you a program summary, it gives you an application schedule, the workshops that you can sign up for, and the dates and times. And then we will offer some virtual office hours at the dates listed. If you are applying for a grant, you want to be living in the resources section where we have the procedural guide. We have the application workbook that can be downloaded. We have our community wildfire protection plan, district map, budget template, and a registered professional forester's contact list. There is a statewide list for registered professional foresters, which we can point you to as well. We also have here some past wildfire prevention grant projects that we have awarded and gives information about those projects. And those are good things to look at to make sure that you are designing a project that is competitive. So the application process, it's kind of, four-step process to get your application in. First is to download and read the procedural guide in its entirety. Step 2 would be to request a project ID via the request form at truckeefire.org/grants, which will be available after this webinar. After completing the project ID request form, you will be assigned a unique project ID and will receive the online application form via email link. I don't know that you want to tap into that email link right away. I do think that you want to work on the workbook first before you start working on the official online application. You'll also receive an opportunity to set up a 30-minute consultation with me to talk over your application and discuss ways to present a competitive project to the district. The consultation is optional, but strongly recommended. Step 3 is to download the application workbook, draft your answers. You really do need to spend time on this document. Well-articulated answers to the prompts is your main opportunity to present a competitive project to us. Your last step would be to complete the online application, copy and paste your drafted responses over from the workbook, and attach all required documents prompted in the online application. Again, everything must be submitted online by Friday, May 2nd, 2025 at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. The submittal link will go away 1 second past 5, so do not be late. We will not accept late applications. There are several evaluation factors that what we do for the review of these applications is we bring in individuals, partners from the county, from town, from some maybe nonprofit partners, and this review committee individually scores and ranks these projects. I do not personally participate in the ranking and selection of projects because I am so intimately involved with each project as they come through and helping people get through the process. It's important to remember that this review committee, they're not going to be familiar with the landowners or the proposed project areas. And so they're also instructed to avoid any sort of bias by basically, they can't consider anything for project prioritization if it's not represented in the application or supporting documentation provided by the applicant. So you really need to spend time on your application and make sure that you are telling a good story and selling this project in a competitive way. The application review committee will then, basically recommend funding or recommend projects for funding to the wildfire prevention manager, Eric Hornfett, the fire chief, and ultimately the board of directors for the fire district. All activities are ultimately subject to Truckee Fire's board of directors' final approval, and the board does reserve the right to reject any and all applications, waive informalities in applications, and accept the applications deemed to be in the best interest of the fire district. Grant recipients will be announced approximately 4 to 6 weeks after the close of solicitation. As here are the evaluation factors listed. This is very public facing and very well articulated in the procedural guide. Exactly what we're looking for each of these buckets. We will also talk in depth about all of these at our webinars. So we will talk about, scope of work, collaboration, project readiness, and your budget next week. In the following week, we will talk about landscape level context, vulnerable populations, and administrative capacity, as well as local and regional plans. So you will have an opportunity to do a deep dive with me on any of these if you desire, and the workshops will all be recorded for your viewing later if that works better for you. The California Environmental Quality Act. This is a big one. It is challenging sometimes, but let's talk through this real quick. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end regarding CEQA. So CEQA is required anytime we do anything at the fire district, right? It's public funding on private lands, and so we do trigger CEQA. If the grantee is not a public agency, Truckee Fire can assume lead agency for CEQA determinations. However, the grantee must have capacity or higher capacity to produce the necessary documentation. If you're planning to use Truckee Fire as lead agency, you must consult with me before applying. Again, Truckee Fire's written approval of documented CEQA compliance is required before commencing any ground disturbing activity. So if you get a grant and you don't have CEQA yet and we haven't approved it, and you have your contractor go out and start work and they invoice you and you try to send us a reimbursement request for that, we will not pay that. We cannot legally pay that invoice, and that responsibility to pay that contractor is now on you, the private landowner or organization that authorized the work to start without having CEQA compliance. You can demonstrate readiness by having your CEQA document ready to submit at time of applying, and this is fairly common because some of these permits that registered professional foresters are going to file for you have a 1-year timeline. And I think there's good hesitation to wait until you are confirmed that this grant is being awarded and that you're going to get funding before you submit your CEQA document to the state. And so that is acceptable, and there are ways to demonstrate your readiness in the application prompts. But you want to be clear about that. What is your pathway? Is it completed? Are you ready to submit? Have you submitted it? Where are you at in the process so that the review committee can understand how quickly this project can be implemented? So if you are awarded a grant, congratulations. It's a huge feat, and there's a lot of, like I said, the hard part now starts post-award. You've done all this application writing, you've done all this work in collaboration, and then, oh shoot, I actually got this grant. Now I need to go implement it. And that is the hard part of the hardest part of this whole process is kind of getting through the implementation, I think. It is a reimbursement grant program, which means the grantee pays for services, products, or supplies, invoices Truckee Fire for the same, and then we reimburse the grantee upon approval of an invoice. No work prior to or after the grant period will be reimbursable, and we can be flexible here. Don't let this be a barrier. We understand that cash flow can be an issue for many people, and being expected to pay a contractor $100,000 out of your pocket may not always be reasonable. So we do have ways to work around that, and we can discuss that. We also have advances that can be considered on a case-by-case basis. We would prefer not to do advances, but they are available. It does require you to deposit it into an interest-bearing account, and it does require more accounting to make sure that that public funding is being used as it's supposed to. There are regular project reporting that must happen, which includes reporting on project accomplishments, challenges, dollars expended, acres of land treated, or activities completed. And the big thing is before, during, and after photos. Really easy to forget sometimes. So if you do get a grant, you need to make sure you're taking before and after photos of high quality. Once a grant agreement has been fully executed, it can only be amended with written advance and consent from Truckee Fire. And we do reserve the right to withdraw grant funding if at any time if stated requirements in the grant agreement are not met. All right, to wrap this up, again, you really must read the procedural guide in its entirety. Please read it thoroughly. A ton of love and effort has gone into that document over the years, and you're not going to be successful if you don't read the procedural guide. And I say this not to be facetious in any way, but it is an honest, direct statement here. You know, this whole process, again, really is your test. You know, we need to have controls and measures in place to ensure that public funding is being allocated to responsible grantees. And if you cannot navigate this grant application process, you're not going to be able to manage a grant and all the reporting requirements that come with it. If you're feeling overwhelmed, that's totally okay. I've shared a lot of information with you today. Let's work together to come up with a plan if needed. And if you don't have any experience writing grants and you're just starting from scratch, then you should consider either finding people in your community that do have that experience, or reach out to your forester or local organizations that may have experience writing grants and managing grants to help you along the process. Developing a competitive project from scratch, if you're starting today, it really can take multiple years. A big misconception with these grant programs is if people think that you can get through this application process in a couple weeks, and that's just not the case. I tell people frequently that when we start with a project idea, we identify a hazard and we say, yeah, that needs to be treated, and we need to get to work there. Usually it takes 2 years before you have boots on the ground getting that project implemented. Okay, so please don't rush through this process. If you're starting from some basic ideas and you want to expand those, let's work through that. And maybe it's something that you develop it over the next year and you apply for us next year. That's totally acceptable. This program will be available every year until Measure T expires. And lastly, projects should be completed in the same fiscal year they are awarded. So for us, our fiscal year ends on June 30th, 2026. And so please think about projects that can be implemented in a field season in the same fiscal year they are awarded. If you're feeling like this grant program is not a good fit for you, there are several other options available to residents in Nevada County, Placer County, and the town of Truckee. A great program available to all residents and Firewise communities, HOAs, road associations is the Nevada County OES microgrant program. This year, they're focusing on hazardous vegetation removal along critical evacuation routes. They're directing this funding to Firewise communities in the form of basically block grants. They have not landed on a number yet, but they are looking at a requirement for one-to-one match, but match could be in kind. And they will be calling for proposals soon. They have not announced it yet, but I have the website there. If you have questions, we have some community members that have applied to this program in the past and have been successful. And if you watch the video I showed you and are thinking that, that's not the type of work that you were imagining being completed on your property or in your community, maybe this micro grant program is a good start. It might be more boutique-like projects where we're doing more handwork, thinning and chipping, and not such an intensive commercial project. There are also other programs in California, including the CFIP program. This is the California Forest Improvement Program. It's a cost share program. If you are reaching out to foresters to apply to this program, they should all know what CFIP is and should be able to get you on a path to considering that program as well. And the federal government also has a program called EQIP, the Environmental Quality Improvement Program, and is also a cost share program. So this is not the only, our grant program is not the only thing available to our residents and our constituents. And if you are even unsuccessful with a grant application to us, you should be looking at other options that are available to you. And we're happy to share that information at any time. So we have some upcoming workshops we talked about. We have 3 more. And you'll have an opportunity to deep dive into developing a project on March 13th. So talking about, what are the steps to developing a project, scope of work, collaboration, budget, readiness, stuff like that. March 20th, we'll talk about how to be competitive, looking at maps and landscape level context, talking about capacity and local assessments. And then the last workshop on April 3rd will be focused on just application submission and mapping requirements. We do have resources available that I showed you on our grant webpage. You can always email grants@truckeefire.org if you have questions. This email box is monitored by multiple staff and will provide you the quickest response. Of course, you can always reach out to myself and Eric to discuss your ideas and see if it's a good fit for this program. And with that, looks like I timed that up beautifully. We've got about 15 minutes for question and answers. I'm happy to stay until 4:30 if needed, if there's a lot of questions. And I might ask Maria to help me with this process if there's been some questions in the chat that have not been answered yet. If you do have a question, why don't you go ahead and raise your hand now or put it in the chat, and we'll look through these and make sure that your questions have been addressed.
There was one question asked in the chat so far that Eric answered very thoroughly, but maybe you can speak to generally if there are changes to state level CEQA requirements in regard to the state of emergency and that sort of thing. How will that affect CEQA requirements for the grants?
Hey, thanks, Maria. Really good one. It's Eric Hornvet, Wildfire Prevention Manager. I'll jump in on this one. So this one is it's a fast-moving target, right? We had the governor sign an emergency proclamation. I think all of us have been hoping to see since the 2018 campfire. It was passed outside of business hours. There's been a ton of interesting comments on what people think of this order, and it's not black and white for us. It doesn't just say, CEQA is exempt for fuels reduction or community protection. It creates like a new pathway that it's dropped the CEQA guidelines and says you still need to go to California Natural Resources Agency or California EPA and get approval for your work that you're doing under this. So we're going to continue to be communicating as exhaustively as possible with partner agencies and keeping our finger on this. What this could mean, as we're now 5 days into this order, is that it could mean that every activity we're talking about within our communities is exempt from CEQA. That does not say it's exempt from the Forest Practice Act. So if you're using a timber harvest plan or timber harvest plan exemption, you likely still need to do that. If you're doing non-commercial work, it might create a pathway for us. So we're going to have to just stay on our toes with this one. And anyone that is applying for any sort of fuel reduction project through this grant program will be the first to know of any important information we find out that could streamline this and make this work easier to take from an idea to implementation. I mean, we're stoked to use this opportunity where we can.
Thanks, Eric. Dillon, we have one hand raised. If you're ready for a question, then Adrian, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thanks, Maria. And Dillon and Eric, as always. One thing I found a little bit confusing was that under eligible costs, you included sequel preparation, and presumably that would be also things like any on-the-ground surveys, like cultural resources surveys that are needed before you can even really start your CEQA. But then later it says, well, those costs aren't reimbursable because they're prior to the grant period. Well, how do we navigate that? What do we do about that? Because you said it's stronger if your CEQA is basically ready to go when you apply, but it's unclear whether it is or isn't part of the reimbursable costs.
Yeah, good question, Adrian. So, I mean, it's just that, like, if you want your project to be extra competitive, then you should probably pay for some of this SQL work to be done before you apply. You know, the packaging up a SQL before an application submittal to demonstrate readiness is a great way to show that, you know, increase your competitiveness and increase potential points awarded to you. But that's not necessarily a requirement of applying. You know, you could still apply and write in those costs for CEQA work post award that would need to be completed within 6 months after you're awarded the project. So while it might present less competitive to the review committee if we're paying for costs associated with CEQA studies, it still is an eligible cost to the grant. But it would be more competitive if that was handled before you applied with your own funding, either whether that's through an HOA or out of pocket from a private property owner.
Okay, that sounds good. One other question, and totally understood, all good, and we will take that into account. You said you wanted work preferably to be completed by the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. I don't know about these fuel reduction projects and what you do or don't do with regard to nesting bird surveys or anything like that, but it seems that there would be certain resources that would be less affected by work later in the season than June 30th. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure, Adrian. Yeah. So ideally, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Nesting birds in Truckee, usually their nesting season's usually over in August 15th, you know, end of August. And if that's written into your CEQA document as kind of a limited operating period to ensure that protection, that's fine. But these projects should be ideally implemented between August and November every year. Is ideal, you know, August until the snow shuts us out. And if it doesn't happen, that's fine. We can work with you and the grantee on an amendment request if it's required to extend the performance period of the grant. But we would prefer to expend the money and the grant budget in the same fiscal year. So that means generally getting an award in July. If you are selected for a grant, you'll get a grant agreement executed on July 1st, which means you could get going immediately if your CEQA document allowed so. And that's dependent on what resources are there and if they're present or not. And then ideally, we're implementing between August until we're shut out by snow.
Okay, all good. That clarified everything I needed to know. Thanks very much.
We had a question as to whether the presentation and recording will be shared on the website, which they will. And all of the information that Dillon covered in the presentation is in the procedural guidelines, which is also available on the website. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand.
All right, well, seeing none, we will end this webinar for the day, and we'll look forward to seeing some of you or all of you next week for round 2. Thank you for attending today. We appreciate it.